Hi, I'm Jay, and today we're tying ball head jigs that I'm using specifically for lake trout. Stay tuned. And we're back. So good afternoon. It's early afternoon today. I'm at the vise tying jigs that I'm using for myself. We're in the season where I head towards the Finger Lakes and we fish for lake trout from shore. There's a few locations. And what we're throwing is a 1/8, maybe a 3/8. Half ounce is getting a little heavy jig. I like just a plain ball head jig for fishing the locations where I fish. There's other head shapes to use that would work very well and probably make a really pretty jig. But I fished for quite a whole bunch of seasons and gotten skunked each time. I started watching the locals, not the guys that show up there with their the H&H fishing gear or their Sims gear or their fly rod. I was watching the local guys that would kind of keep to themselves, that were using tackle and equipment that was probably a few seasons too old. The guys that don't like talking to outsiders, right? And I was just kind of watching what they were throwing. Everybody was throwing a jig. Occasionally you'd get a guy using live bait. But for the most part, fishing from shore, a smallish jig. So I narrowed it down to 1/8. I went a little bit smaller, a little bit too light. You go a little bit heavier and your jig starts sinking a little bit too quickly. One of the things that I learned about watching the locals was the timing or the cadence of your jigging motion. So I'm using a 6.5 foot rod. If I had a 7-foot rod, that'd even be better. Spinning rod. We're just pitching the jigs out as far as we can because at the couple locations there in the Finger Lakes, I'm fishing Cayuga Lake a lot. It'll be fairly shallow, 6 to 10 feet, and then it drops. It drops quickly to 50, 60 feet. So we're trying to get it out near that edge. The cadence, the jigging cadence that the guys were using was a great big sweep from 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and then slowly letting it down. So the jig itself was doing a large upswing as we pull the rod back, and then coming down slow, and that's when the fish would strike. So for years I used heads with just standard hooks. Lately I've been casting up an awful lot of jigs, mostly for the steelhead fishing north of Syracuse, farther north, Salmon River and northern New York State. But I thought these hooks would be perfect to add to the bucktails that we were fishing at the Finger Lakes. So what I did was, turn on my face. So what I have here is a 1/8 jig, just a ball head, nothing fancy at all, simple eye, and let's get this moved in just a little bit. A simple eye, and the hook that I'm using is the Mustad 32833, which is a 2X strong hook. Very strong, super sharp. and this is a number 2 hook and a 1/8 head. And I've tied lake trout jigs before, and the color that I was using from the very beginning was an olive and white. The fish are just gorging themselves on Gobie. So anything in the natural brown, the lighter tan, olive colors works perfectly. Today we're going to use a RootBeer in an olive RootBeer. The RootBeer I chose is on the lighter side. So this is the one we're going to use. It's fairly light. This is your typical RootBeer, and I don't know if it shows up well on the monitor, but the typical color RootBeer is a little bit more red, more brownish, has a little bit darker tone to it. And this one is just, maybe a mistake in the dyeing process, a tail that went in the bath when it was slightly diluted. It's fairly dark at the base of the hairs, and it gets lighter, almost like a cream. So that's what we're going to use today. I think that will look very good. I haven't yet decided on the flash we're going to add. I'm still mulling it over in my head. I'll show you the selection that I grabbed out of my inventory, and I'm leaning towards the Larva lace, surprisingly, even though that crinkle mirror flash has been my my new favorite tinsel to use all throughout 2023. But let's get cracking. So in the vise, like I said, it's the 1/8 ball head with that number 2. It's a 32833 2X hook, and I'm going to start with my rod wrapping thread, size A, round nylon, unwaxed. It's nothing special. Walk the thread down with open wraps, and then back to the head of the jig, locking it in place. And this is a new spool. It's feeling a little loose. Let's just adjust this slightly. The spool's a little heavy, so ideally when I let it go, it should just stay. It shouldn't unravel all the way down into my trash bag. But it is a little loose. If I drop it, it stops, but if I give it a slight pressure, it starts to unravel. So it's fine. Of course, the breaking as I wrap, is controlled by my hand, my opening and closing of my fingers. So that'll be just fine. So I lock the thread in place like normal. I'm going to start with the darker color, which will end up on the back of the jig as it gets fished. So I start with the olive, snip my pinch, begin by removing all the short hairs, the broken hairs, any of the fuzz from the base of the pinch, and then I switch my grip. And this is a really nice tail. The hairs are all almost the same length, but I will just lightly restack slightly, just to rein in some of those really long pieces. Check the pinch for any broken tips or kind of short, crooked pieces. They can come right out. And then I can walk my fingers back and forth as I change the grip on my pinch. And I want the tail to extend past the bend of the hook, the length of the body, past the bend of the hook. And on my vise, of course, it's the end of the silver part of my jaws. And when I'm happy with that, I can change my grip one last time, keep this pinch tight through the whole process. I trim right along my fingertips. There's 4 wraps towards the bend of the hook. when I dropped my bobbin, it did unravel. So let me just fix this. My pinch is still tight on the hook. Keep this pinch tight throughout the whole process. There's 3 wraps back towards, overlapping towards the head of the jig. So now I can let go, and you can see quite clearly that V, and that's what we're going for. Just make sure my bobbin's okay. If I sit it on my desktop, it won't unravel. It's just when I drop it over the edge of the table where it unravels. Give this a pinch and give it a twist so it goes to the what becomes the back of the jig when it's fished upright. And then we can go to our next color. And this is a really pretty tail as well. I kind of like the fact that the tone is a little bit lighter than a regular root beer. It's kind of a pretty tail. And again, removing the fuzz and the broken pieces from the butt ends of my pinch. Then I can turn it, switch my hands and stack by hand, just removing those real long fibers and placing them back in my pinch. Being a light colored hair, if I turn my body just slightly so I'm looking at the floor, which is a lot darker, I can see those tips much easier than when I'm looking at my desktop, which has a white cardstock. The white cardstock actually helps me see the darker colors. So again, I'm walking my fingers back and forth until I get the length of pinch that I want, so the hairs are the same length between the olive and the root beer. Again, this pinch stays tight. I trim right along my fingers, place it on top, 4 wraps towards the bend of the hook. There's 3 wraps crisscrossing to lock that into place, and again you see that nice V. At this point I can unlock my vise and turn it just so I can see the side of the jig. And we're going to add some flash, but I have a couple different brands. I have some crinkle mirror flash, which has been my favorite throughout 2023. There's a peacock black. There's a root beer, which is a nice yellowy gold, which I kind of like. Here's an angel hair yellow, which is a yellow gold. And then an angel hair antique, which is more of a darker, antique-y looking gold. I like them both, but I think for this jig I want to go with the angel hair in the antique. So we've chosen to use the Larva lace, the antique gold, which I think is a really neat color. It's it's that nice it's not a yellow gold, it's more of a darker color. And Larva lace, it's super fine tinsel, a little bit unruly. I think that on this jig it'll look real nice for us. Alright, so my vise is unlocked just so I can rotate it, and I can just face the side of the jig towards me. I'm going to snip a pinch a little bit longer than the tail, so I can add it straight down the lateral line. And I try not to make this pinch too big. This is probably 10 pieces or so, and I trim it the same length as the tail. Rotate my jig, take a pinch of a similar size, and again, this is super fine tinsel. it'd be impossible for me to count out 6 pieces like I would with regular Flashabou. And they're all different lengths. Some of them are just at my fingertips. There's some tinsel that's extending even farther. So it's a property of the material that I do like. I like the fact that it's, even though you have a pinch, there's different length fibers in here. So I think it does make a difference when you're fishing it as it flows in the water, etc. There we have 2 pieces locked on with just a couple wraps down each side along the lateral line, and now we can finish the jig off as normal. With touching wraps. And to whip finish this, what I like to do is take some size A thread of an opposite color and cut a piece about 18 inches long or so. Fold it in half to create a loop, which goes underneath my last wrap, and then I can add 3 or 4 touching wraps to about halfway down the collar, and then touching wraps back up to create a nice cone, a nice smooth collar. Draw this through and clip our tag end. Ooh, that X-Acto knife is bold. Before we take a good look at this, I'm just going to take my lacquer-based head cement and there we have it. Done really well with this jig, and like I said, different color combinations, but anything in the brown, natural brown, olive realm is what we're going for. Let's turn my face off, and there we have it. No special name. This jig is representing a Gobie, which is so typical in the Finger Lakes, and the lake trout just gorge themselves all fall into the winter. And like I said, we're into December right now here in New York State. Ice fishing hasn't really started. There might be some local ponds and small lakes that might have ice, but for the most part we're still waiting for the larger lakes to get some proper ice so we can get out and walk on the hard water. And during that time in between hunting season and ice season, like I said, I'm making my trip to the Finger Lakes and fishing for lake trout, mostly from shore in the lakes. Though I know there are guys that love hitting the tributaries all up and down from north to south along those Finger Lakes. So, but I think that will do it for us today. I'd like to remind everybody, stop in, check out the website, jworthhandtied.com. Been trying to add things as we get them. I try to do my regular inventory. I'm filling those boxes, and I try to do a little extra, add those to the website. So check that out, jworthhandtied.com. So if you have any ideas, color combination ideas, or comments on what we did today, add those down below. As always, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. Keep tying, guys, and until next time, tight lines.